Chapter 8. Cadet Fitz-Osterlen fail. Please sit down. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that lack of knowledge about famous and important battles from the history of our fatherland is embarrassing for every patriot and good citizen, but in the case of a future officer is simply a scandal. I shall take the liberty of making one more small observation, Cadet Fitz-Osterlen. For 20 years, that is, since I've been a lecturer at this institution, I don't recall a diploma exam in which a question about the Battle of Brenna hasn't come up. Thus, ignorance in this regard virtually rules out any chances of a career in the army. Well, but if one is a baron, one doesn't have to be an officer. One can try one's luck in politics or in diplomacy, which I sincerely wish for you, Cadet Fitz-Osterlen. And let's return to Brenna, gentlemen. Cadet Puttkammer. Present. Please come to the map and continue, from the point where eloquence gave up on the Lord Baron. Yes, sir. The reason Field Marshal Menno Cohorn decided to execute a maneuver and a rapid march westwards were the reports from reconnaissance informing that the army of the Nordlings was coming to the relief of the besieged fortress of Maena. The Marshal decided to cut off the Nordlings' progress and force them into a decisive battle. To this end, he divided the forces of the Center Army Group. He left some of his men at Maena and set off at a rapid march with the rest of his troops. Cadet Puttkammer, you aren't a novelist. You're to be an officer. What kind of expression is the rest of his troops? Please give me the exact ordre de bataille of Marshal Cohorn's strike force, using military terminology. Yes, Captain. Field Marshal Cohorn had two armies under his command. The 4th Horse Army, commanded by Major General Marcus Brabant, our school's patron. Very good, Cadet Puttkammer. Damn toady, hissed Cadet Fitz-Osterlen from his desk. And the 3rd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Retz de Melistok. The 4th Horse Army consisted of, numbering over 20,000 soldiers, the Venendal Division, the Marne Division, the Frunsburg Division, the 2nd Vicovarian Brigade, the 3rd Derlanian Brigade, and the Nausicaa and Vrihed Divisions. The 3rd Army consisted of the Alba Division, the Dythwin Division, and the Ardfen Division, stated Julia Pretty Kitty Abatamarco. If you haven't ballsed anything up, of course. They definitely had a large silver sun on their gonfalon? Yes, Colonel, stated the reconnaissance commander firmly. Without doubt they did. Ardfen, murmured Pretty Kitty. Interesting. That would mean that not only the Horse Army, but also part of the 3rd are coming for us, in those columns you supposedly saw. No, sir. Nothing on faith alone. I have to see it with my own eyes. Captain, during my absence, you command the company. I order you to send a liaison officer to Colonel Pangrad. But, Colonel, is that wise, to go yourself? That's an order. Yes, sir. It's sheer lunacy, Colonel. The commander of the reconnaissance outshouted the rush of the gallop. We might run into some elven patrol. Don't talk. Lead on. The small troop galloped hard down the gorge, flashed like the wind down the stream's valley, and rushed into a forest. Here they had to slow down. The undergrowth impeded riding, and furthermore, they were indeed in danger of suddenly happening upon reconnaissance troops or pickets, which the Nilfgaardians had undoubtedly sent. The party of mercenaries had admittedly stolen up on the enemy from the flank, not head-on, but the flanks were certainly also guarded. The game was thus as risky as hell. But Pretty Kitty liked games like that, and there wasn't a soldier in the entire Free Company who wouldn't have followed her all the way to hell. It's here, said the commander of the reconnaissance. The tower. Julia Abatamarco shook her head. The tower was crooked, ruined, bristling with broken beams, forming a latticework through which the wind, blowing from the west, played as though on a tin whistle. It wasn't known who had built the tower here, in a wilderness, or why, but it was apparent it had been built a long time before. It won't collapse? Certainly not, Colonel. Sir wasn't used among the mercenaries of the Free Company, or Madam, only rank. Julia climbed to the top of the tower, almost running up. The reconnaissance commander only joined a minute later, panting like a bull covering a heifer. Leaning on the crooked railing, Pretty Kitty surveyed the valley using a telescope, sticking her tongue between her lips and sticking out her shapely rear. The reconnaissance commander felt a quiver of excitement at the sight. He quickly controlled himself. Hard fin, there's no doubt. Julia Abatimarco licked her lips. I can also see Elan Trahe's Dialanians. There are also elves from the Vriheth Brigade, our old friends from Maribor and Maena. Ha-ha! There are also the Death's Heads, the famous Nazakea Brigade. I can also see the flames on the pennants of the Dythwin Armoured Division, and a white standard with a black Alarion, the sign of the Alba Division. You recognize them, murmured the reconnaissance commander, as though they were friends. Are you so well informed? I'm a graduate of the military academy. Pretty Kitty cut him off. I'm a qualified officer. Good. I've seen what I wanted to see. Let's return to the company. The 4th and 3rd horse are making for us, said Julia Abatimarco. I repeat, the whole of the 4th horse and probably the whole of the cavalry of the 3rd army. A cloud of dust was rising into the sky behind the standards that I saw. By my reckoning, 40,000 horse are heading this way in those 3 columns, and maybe more. Perhaps Kuhorn has divided up the Center Army group, finished Adam Adieu Pangrat, leader of the Free Company. He only took the 4th horse and the cavalry from the 3rd, without infantry, in order to move quicker. Ha! Julia, were I in the place of Constable Natalis or King Foltest, I know. Pretty Kitty's eyes flashed. I know what you'd do. Have you sent runners to them? Naturally. Natalis is nobody's fool. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps. Adieu didn't let her finish, and I even think that will happen. Spur your horse, Julia. I want to show you something. They rode a few furlongs quickly, pulling a long way ahead of the rest of the soldiers. The sun was almost touching the hills in the west. The wetland forests cloaked the valley in a long shadow. But enough could be seen for Pretty Kitty to guess at once what Adieu Pangrat had meant to show her. Here. Adieu confirmed her speculation standing up in the stirrups. I would engage the enemy here tomorrow, if the command of the army were mine. Nice terrain, agreed Julia Abatimarco. Level, hard, smooth. There's room to form up. From those hills to those fish ponds there, it'll be some 3 miles. That hill there is a perfect command position. You're right. And there, look in the centre. There's one more small lake or fish pond. It's sparkling over there. It can be taken advantage of. That little river is suitable for a border because although it's small, it's marshy. What's that river called, Julia? We rode that way yesterday, didn't we? Do you remember? I've forgotten. I think it's the Halter or something like that. Whoever knows those parts can easily imagine the whole thing, while to those who are less well-travelled, I shall reveal that the left wing of the Royal Army reached the place where today the settlement of Brenner is located. At the time of the battle, there was no settlement, for the year before it had been sent up in smoke by the squirrel elves and had burned down to the ground. For there, on the left wing, stood the Redanian Royal Corps, which the Count of Reuter was commanding, and there were 8,000 foot and front-line horse in that corps. The centre of the royal formation stood beside a hill later to be named Gallows Hill. There, on the hill, stood with their detachment King Foltest and Constable Jan Natalis, having a prospect of the whole battlefield from high up. Here the main forces of our army were gathered, 12,000 brave Temerian and Redanian infantrymen, formed in 4 great squares, protected by 10 cavalry companies, standing right at the northern end of the fish pond called Golden Pond by local folk. The central formation, meanwhile, had a reserve regiment in the second line, 3,000 Vicimian and Mariborian foot, over which Voivode Bronibor held command. From the southern edge of Golden Pond, however, up to the row of fish ponds and a bend in the river Chotla, to the marshes a mile wide, stood the right wing of our army. The volunteer regiment formed of Mahakam dwarves, 8 companies of light horse, and companies of the eminent Free Mercenary Company. The condottiero, Adam Pangrat, and dwarf, Barclay Elves, commanded the right wing. Field Marshal Menno Coulthorne deployed the Nilfgaardian army opposite them, about a mile or 2 away, on a bare field beyond the forest. Iron, hard men stood there like a black wall, regiment by regiment, company by company, squadron by squadron. Endless, it seemed, as far as the eye could see. And from the forest of standards and spears one could deduce that it was not just a broad but a deep array, for it was an army of 46,000, which few knew about at that time, and just as well, because at the sight of that Nilfgaardian might, many hearts sank somewhat, and hearts started to beat beneath the breastplates of even the bravest, started to beat like hammers, for it became patent that a heavy and bloody battle would soon begin, and many of those who stood in that array would not see the sunset. Yara, holding his spectacles, which were sliding off his nose, read the entire passage of text once again, sighed, rubbed his pate, and then picked up a sponge, squeezing it a little, and rubbing out the last sentence. The wind soughed in the leaves of a linden tree, and bees buzzed. The children, as children will, tried hard to outshout one another. A ball which had rolled across the grass came to rest against the foot of the old man. Before he managed to bend over, clumsy and ungainly, one of his grandchildren flashed past like a little wolf cub, grabbing the ball in full flight. He knocked the table, which began to rock, and Yara saved the inkwell from falling over with his right hand, holding down the sheets of paper with the stump of his left. The bees buzzed, heavy with tiny yellow balls of acacia pollen. Yara took up his writing again. The morning was cloudy, but the sun broke through the clouds, and its height clearly signalled the passing of the hours. A wind got up. Pennants fluttered and flapped like flocks of birds taking flight, and Nilfgaard stood on until everyone began to wonder why Marshal Menno Coulthorne did not give his order to march forward. When? Menno Coulthorne raised his head from the maps and turned his gaze on his commanders. When, you ask, will I give the order to begin? No one said anything. Menno quickly looked his commanders up and down. The most anxious and nervous seemed to be those who were going to remain in reserve. Ilentrahe, commander of the 7th Delanian, and Gaius van Loo of the Nausicaa Brigade. Uda de Wingald, the marshal's aide-de-camp, who had the least chance of active involvement in the fighting, was also nervous. Those who were to strike first looked composed, why, even bored. Marcus Brybant was yawning. Lieutenant General Retz de Melis Stoke kept sticking his little finger in his ear, pulling it out and looking at it, as though really expecting to find something worthy of his attention. Oberst Raymond Tyrconnell, the young commander of the Ardfane division, whistled softly, fixing his gaze on a point on the horizon known only to him. Oberst Liam Epmuir Moss of the Dythwyn division turned the pages of his ever-present slim volume of poetry. Tibor Egerbracht of the Alba Heavy Lancers scratched the back of his neck with the end of a riding crop. We shall begin the attack, said Coulthorne, as soon as the patrols return. Those hills to the north trouble me, gentlemen. Before we strike, I must know what is behind them. Lamar Flout was afraid. He was terribly afraid, and the fear was creeping over his innards. It seemed to him he had at least 12 slimy eels covered in stinking mucus in his intestines, doggedly searching for an opening they would be able to escape through. An hour earlier, when the patrol had received its orders and set off, Flout had hoped deep down that the cool of the morning would drive away the terror. hoped that routine, practiced ritual, the hard and severe ceremony of service would quell the fear. He was disappointed. Only now, after an hour had passed, and after travelling some 5 miles, far, dangerously far from his comrades, deep, hazardously deep in enemy territory, close, mortally close to unknown danger, had the fear showed what it was capable of. They stopped at the edge of a fir forest, prudently not emerging from behind the large juniper bushes growing at the edge. A wide basin stretched out before them, beyond a belt of low spruces. Fog trailed over the tops of the grass. "No one," judged Flout. "Not a soul. Let's go back. We're a little too far already." The sergeant looked at him askance. "Far? We've barely ridden a mile, and crawling along like lame tortoises at that." "It'd be worth," he said, "having a look beyond that hill, Lieutenant. I reckon the prospect will be better from there. A long way over both valleys. If someone's heading that way, we can't not see them. Well then, do we ride over, sir? It's no more than a few furlongs." "A few furlongs," thought Flout. "Over open ground, totally exposed." The eels squirmed, violently searching for a way out of his guts. At least one, Flout felt clearly, was well on its way. "I heard the clank of a stirrup, the snorting of a horse, over there among the vivid green of young pines on a sandy slope. Did something move there? A figure? Are they surrounding us?" A rumour was going around the camp that a few days earlier, the mercenaries of the Free Company, having wiped out a patrol of the Vrihet Brigade in an ambush, had taken an elf alive. It was said they'd castrated him, torn his tongue out, and cut off all his fingers, and finally gouged out his eyes. Now, they had jeered, you won't frolic with your elven whore in any fashion, and you won't even be able to watch her when she frolics with others. "Well, sir?" The sergeant cleared his throat. "Shall we nip up that hill?" Lamar Flout swallowed. "No," he said. "We cannot dally. We've ascertained it. There's no enemy here. We must give a dispatch on it to headquarters. Back we go." Menno Coehorn listened to the dispatch and raised his head from the maps. "To your companies," he ordered briefly. "Mr. Brabant, Mr. Melis Stoke, attack." "Long live the Emperor!" yelled Tyrconnell and Eggebracht. Menno looked at them strangely. "To your companies," he repeated. "May the great sun enlighten your glory." Milo van der Beek, halfling, field surgeon, known as Rusty, greedily breathed into his nostrils the heady blend of the smells of iodine, ammonia, alcohol, ether, and magical elixirs hanging beneath the tent roof. He wanted to enjoy that aroma to the full now, while it was still healthy, pure, virginally uncontaminated, and clinically sterile. He knew it wouldn't stay like that for long. He glanced at the operating table, also virginally white, and at the surgical instruments, at the dozens of tools which inspired respect and confidence by the cool and menacing dignity of their cold steel, the pristine cleanliness of the metal sheen, the order and aesthetics of their arrangement. His staff, 3 women, busied themselves around the instruments. Rusty spat and made a correction in his thoughts. 1 woman and 2 girls. He spat again. 1 old, though beautiful and young-looking grandmother, and 2 children. A sorceress and healer called Marty Södergren, and the volunteers, Shani, a student from Oxenfoot, Yola, a priestess from the Temple of Melitele in Elender. "I know Marty Södergren," thought Rusty. "I've already worked with that beauty more than once. A bit of a nymphomaniac, she's also prone to hysteria, but that's nothing, as long as her magic works. Anesthetic, disinfectant, and blood-staunching spells." Yola, a priestess, or rather a novice, a girl with looks as plain and dull as linen, with long, strong peasant hands. The temple had prevented those hands from becoming tainted by the ugly mark of heavy and dirty slogging on the soil, but it hadn't managed to disguise their descent. "No," thought Rusty, "I'm not afraid for her. By and large, those peasant woman's hands are sure hands, trustworthy hands. Besides, girls from temples seldom disappoint, and they don't cave in at moments of despair, but seek comfort in religion, in their mystical faith. Interestingly, it helps. He glanced at red-haired Shani, nimbly threading curved needles with catgut. Shani, a child from reeking city backstreets who made it to the Academy of Oxenfurt thanks to her own thirst for knowledge and the unimaginable sacrifices of her parents in paying her fees. A schoolgirl, a jester, a cheerful scamp. What does she know? How to thread needles? Put on tourniquets? Hold retractors? Ha! The question is, when will the little red-haired student faint, drop the retractors, and tumble nose first into the open belly of a patient being operated on? People aren't very hardy, he thought. I asked to be given an elf woman, or somebody from my own race, but no, there's no trust. Not towards me either, as a matter of fact. I'm a halfling, an unhuman, a stranger. Shani. Yes, Mr. Van der Beek? Rusty. I mean, to you, it's Mr. Rusty. What's this, Shani? And what's it for? Are you testing me, Mr. Rusty? Answer, girl. It's a respiratory, for stripping the periosteum during amputations, so that the periosteum doesn't crack under the teeth of the saw, to make the sawing clean and smooth. Satisfied? Did I pass? Quiet, girl, quiet. He raked his fingers through his hair. Interesting, he thought. There are 4 of us doctors here, and each one's ginger. Is it fate or what? Please step outside the tent, girls. He beckoned. They obeyed, though all of them snorted to themselves, each in her own way. Outside the tent sat a cluster of orderlies enjoying the last minutes of sweet idleness. Rusty cast a severe glance at them and sniffed to check if they were already plastered. A blacksmith, a huge fellow, was bustling around by his table, which resembled a torture chamber, and organizing his tools, which served to pull the wounded out of suits of armor, mail shirts, and bent visors. In a moment, over there, began Rusty without introductions, indicating the field. People will start slaughtering each other, and a moment after that moment, the first casualties will appear. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. Each one of us knows their duties and their place. If everyone obeys what they ought to obey, nothing can go wrong. Clear? None of the girls commented. Over there, continued Rusty, pointing again, almost 100,000 soldiers will begin to wound each other, in very elaborate ways. There are, including the other 2 hospitals, 12 of us doctors. Not for all the world will we manage to help all those that are in need. Not even a scanty percentage of those in need. No one expects that. But we're going to treat them. Because it is, excuse the banality, our raison d'être to help those in need. So we shall, banally, help as many as we manage to help. Once again, no one commented. Rusty turned around. We won't manage to do much more than we're capable of, he said more quietly and more warmly. But we shall all do our best to make sure it won't be much less. They've set off, stated Constable Jan Natalis, and wiped his sweaty hand on his hip. Your Majesty, Nilfgaard has set off. They're heading for us. King Foltest brought his dancing horse, a grey in a trapping decorated with lilies, under control. He turned his beautiful profile, worthy of featuring on coins, towards the constable. Then we must receive them with dignity. Constable, sir. Gentlemen. Death to the Black Cloaks! Yelled the mercenary Adamodio Pangrat and Graf de Reuter in unison. The constable looked at them, then straightened up and breathed in deeply. To your companies. From a distance, the Nilfgaardian war drums thundered dully. Crumhorns, olifants, and battlehorns wailed. The ground, struck by thousands of hooves, shuddered. Here they come, said Andy Bieberveld, a halfling and the leader of the convoy, brushing the hair from his small pointed ear. Any moment. Tara Hildebrandt, D.D. Brewer-Hoffmeyer, and the other carters who were gathered around him nodded. They could also hear the dull, monotonous thud of hooves coming from behind the hill and forest. They could feel the trembling of the ground. The roar suddenly increased, jumping a tone higher. The archer's first salvo. Andy Bieberveld was experienced and had seen, or rather heard, many a battle. There'll be another. He was right. Now they'll clash. With under the carts, suggested William Hardbottom, known as Momotek, fidgeting anxiously. I'm telling you. Bieberveld and the other halflings looked at him with pity. Under the carts? What for? Nearly a quarter of a mile separated them from the site of the battle, and even if a patrol turned up here at the rear by the convoys, would hiding under a cart save anyone? The roaring and rumbling increased. Now, Andy Bieberveld judged, and he was right again. A distinct, macabre noise, which made the hair on their heads stand up, reached the ears of the Vittlers from a distance of a quarter of a mile, from beyond the hill and the forest, through the roaring and the sudden thud of iron smashing against iron. Squealing, the gruesome, desperate, wild squealing and shrieking of mutilated animals. The cavalry! Bieberveld licked his lips. The cavalry have impaled themselves on the pikes. I just, stammered out the pale Momotek. Don't know how the horses are to blame. The horsens. Yara rubbed out another sentence with a sponge. God only knew how many that made. He squinted his eyes, recalling that day. The moment the two armies clashed. When the two armies, like determined mastiffs, went for each other's throats, clenched in a mortal grip. He searched for words he could use to describe it. In vain. The wedge of cavalry rammed into the square. Like the thrust of a gigantic dagger, the Alba Division crushed everything that was defending access to the living body of the Temerian infantry. The pikes, javelins, halberds, spears, pavises, and shields. Like a dagger, the Alba Division thrust into the living body and drew blood. Blood in which horses now splashed and slid. But the dagger's blade, though thrust in deep, hadn't reached the heart or any of the vital organs. The wedge of the Alba Division, instead of smashing and dismembering the Temerian square, thrust in and became stuck. Became lodged in the elastic horde of foot soldiers as thick as pitch. At first, it didn't look dangerous. The head and sides of the wedge were made up of elite, heavily armoured companies, and the lanzknechts' edges and blades rebounded from the shields and armour plate like hammers from anvils, and neither was there any way to get through the barding of the steeds. And although, every now and then, one of the armoured men would tumble from his horse, or with his horse, the swords, battle-axes, hatchets, and morning stars of the cavalrymen cut down the pressing infantrymen. Trapped in the throng, the wedge shuddered and began to drive in deeper. Alba! Second Lieutenant Devin ap Mera heard the cry of Oberst Egebrecht, soaring above the clanging, roaring, groaning, and neighing. Forward, Alba! Long live the Emperor! They set off, hacking, clubbing, and slashing. Beneath the hooves of the squealing and kicking horses was the sound of splashing, crunching, grinding, and snapping. Alba! The wedge became caught again. The lanzknechts, although thinned out and bloodied, didn't yield, but pressed forward and gripped the cavalry like pliers, until they cracked. Under the blows of halberds, battle-axes, and flails, the armoured troops of the front line caved in and broke. Jabbed by partisans and pikes, hauled from the saddle by the hooks of guisarme and bear spears, mercilessly pounded by iron balls and chains and clubs, the cavalrymen of the Alba Division began to die. The wedge thrust into the square of infantry, which not long before had been menacing iron, cutting into a living body, was now like an icicle in a huge peasant fist. "Temerier! For the king, boys! Kill the black cloaks!" But neither was it coming easily to the lanzknechts. Alba didn't let itself be broken up. Swords and battle-axes rose and fell, hacked and slashed, and the infantry paid a grim price in blood for every horseman knocked from the saddle. Oberst Egebracht, stabbed through a slit in his armour by a pike blade as thin as a bodkin, yelled and rocked in the saddle. Before anyone could help him, an awful blow of a flail swept him to the ground. The infantry teemed over him. The standard, with a black Illyrion bearing a gold perisonium on its chest, wobbled and fell. The armoured soldiers, including also Second Lieutenant Devlin Epmera, rushed over to it, hacking, hewing, trampling and yelling. "I'd like to know," thought Devlin Epmera, tugging his sword out of the cloven kettle hat and skull of a Temerian Landsknecht. "I'd like to know," he thought, deflecting with a sweeping blow the toothed blade of a guisarme which was stabbing at him. "I'd like to know what all this is for. What's the point of it? And who's the cause of it?" And then the convent of the great master sorceresses gathered, our esteemed mothers, whose memory will always live among us, for, the great master sorceresses of the First Lodge decided to... Novice Abond, you are unprepared. Fail. Sit down. But I revised really. Sit down. "Why the hell do we have to learn about this ancient history?" muttered Abond, sitting down. "Who's bothered about it today? And what use is it? Silence. Novice Nimue?" "Present, mistress. I can see that." "Do you know the answer to the question? If you don't, sit down and don't waste my time." "Yes, I do." "Go on." "So, the chronicles teach us that the convent of master sorceresses gathered at Bald Mountain Castle to decide on how to end the damaging war that the Emperor of the South was waging with the kings of the North. Esteemed Mother Azira, the Holy Martyr, said that the rulers would not stop fighting until they had lost a lot of men, and esteemed Mother Philippa, the Holy Martyr, answered, "Let us then give them a great and bloody, awful and cruel battle. Let us bring about such a battle. Let the Emperor's armies and the King's forces run in blood in that battle, and then we, the Great Lodge, shall force them to make peace." And this is precisely what happened. The esteemed mothers caused the Battle of Brenna to happen, and the rulers were forced to sign the Peace of Sintra. "Very good, Novice Nimue. I'd have given you a starred A grade, had it not been for that 'so' at the beginning of your contribution. We don't begin sentences with 'so.' Sit down. And now, who'll tell us about the Peace of Sintra?" The bell for the break rang, but the novices didn't react with immediate uproar and the banging of desktops. They maintained a peaceful and dignified silence. They weren't chits from the kindergarten now. They were third formers. They were 14, and that carried certain expectations. There's not much to add here." Rusty assessed the condition of the first wounded man who was right then sullying the immaculate white of the table. "Crushed thigh bone. The artery is intact, otherwise they would have brought us a corpse. It looks like an axe blow, and at the same time the saddle's hard pommel acted like a woodcutter's chopping block. Please look." Shani and Yola bent over. Rusty rubbed his hands. "As I said, nothing to add. All we can do is take away. To work. Yola, tourniquet, tightly. Shani, knife. Not that one. The double-bladed one for amputations." The wounded man couldn't tear his restless gaze from their hands, tracked their movements with the eyes of a terrified animal caught in a snare. "A little magic, Marty, if you please," nodded the halfling, leaning over the patient so as to fill his entire field of vision. "I'm going to amputate, son." "No!" yelled the injured man, thrashing his head around and trying hard to escape from Marty Södergren's hands. I don't want to. If I don't amputate, you die. I'd rather die. The wounded man was speaking slower and slower under the effect of the healer's magic. I'd rather die than be a cripple. Let me die. I beg you, let me die. I can't. Rusty raised the knife, looked at the blade, at the still shining, immaculate steel. I can't let you die, for it so happens that I'm a doctor. He struck the blade in decisively and cut deeply. The wounded man howled. For a human, inhumanly. The messenger reined in his horse so hard that turf sprayed from its hooves. 2 adjutants clutched the bridle and calmed down the foaming steed. The messenger dismounted. "From whom?" shouted Jan Natalis. "From whom do you come?" "From Graf de Ruyter," the messenger panted. "We've held the Black Cloaks, but there are severe casualties. Graf de Ruyter requests reinforcements." "There are no reinforcements," the constable replied after a moment's silence. "You must hold out. You must." And here, Rusty indicated with the expression of a collector showing off his collection. "Please look at the beautiful result of a cut to the belly. Someone has helped us somewhat by previously conducting an amateur laparotomy on the poor wretch. It's good he was carried carefully. None of his more important organs have been lost. I mean, I assume they haven't been. What's up with him, Shani, in your opinion? Why such a face, girl? Have you only known men from the outside before today?" "The intestines are damaged, Mr. Rusty." "A diagnosis as accurate as it is obvious. One doesn't even have to look, it's enough to sniff. A cloth, Yola. Marty, there's still too much blood. Be so kind as to give us a little more of your priceless magic. Shani, clamp. Put on some arterial forceps. You can see it's pouring, can't you? Yola, knife." "Who's winning?" suddenly asked the man being operated on, quite lucidly, although he mumbled a little, rolling his goggling eyes. "Tell me, who is winning?" "Son." Rusty stooped over the open, bloody and throbbing abdominal cavity. "That really is the last thing I'd be worrying about in your shoes." Cruel and bloody fighting then began on the left wing and the centre of the line. But here, though great was Nilfgaard's fierceness and impetus, their charge broke on the royal army like an ocean wave breaks on a rock. For here stood the select soldiers, the valiant Mariborian, Vicimian, and Rhetorian armoured companies, and also the dogged landsknechts, the professional soldiers of fortune, whom cavalry could not frighten. And thus they fought, truly like the sea against a rocky cliff. Thus continued the battle, in which you could not guess who had the upper hand, for although the waves endlessly beat against the rock, not weakening, and they only fell back to strike anew, the rock stood on, as it had always stood, still visible among the turbulent waves. The battle unfolded in a different way on the right wing of the royal army. Like an old sparrow-hawk that knows where to stoop and peck its prey to death, so Field Marshal Menno Coehorn knew where to aim his blows. Clenching in his iron fist his select divisions, the Dythwen Lancers and the armoured Ardfin, he struck at the junction of the line above Golden Pond, where the companies from Brugge stood. Although the Bruggeans resisted heroically, they turned out to be more weakly accoutred, both in armour and in spirit, than their foes. They did not weather the Nilfgaardian advance. 2 companies of the Free Company, under the old Condottiero Adam Pancrat, went to their aid, and held back Nilfgaard, paying a severe price in blood. But the awful threat of being surrounded stared the dwarves of the volunteer regiment standing on the right flank in the face, and the severing of the array imperilled the whole royal army. Yara dipped his quill pen in the inkwell. His grandchildren, further away in the orchard, were shouting. their laughter ringing like little glass bells. Jan Natalis, none the less attentive as a crane, had noticed the menacing danger, and understood in an instant which way the wind was blowing, and, without delay, sent a messenger to the dwarves with an order for Colonel Elves. In all of his 17-year-old naivety, Cornet Aubrey believed that to reach the right wing, deliver the order, and return to the hill would take him 10 minutes at most, absolutely no more. Not on Chiquita, a mare as nimble and fleet as a hind. Even before he had arrived at Golden Pond, the cornet had become aware of two things. There was no telling when he'd reached the right wing, and there was no way of telling when he'd managed to return, and that Chiquita's fleetness would come in very handy. Fighting was raging on the battlefield to the east of Golden Pond. The Black Cloaks and the Breguet horse, protecting the infantry array, were smiting each other. In front of the cornet's eyes, figures in green, yellow, and red cloaks suddenly shot out like sparks, like the glass of a stained glass window, from the whirl of the battle, chaotically bolting towards the river Chotla. Nilfgaardians flooded like a black river behind them. Aubrey pulled his mare back hard, jerked the reins, ready to turn tail and flee, get out of the way of the fugitives and the pursuers. A sense of duty took the upper hand. The cornet pressed himself to his horse's neck and galloped at breakneck speed. All around was yelling and hoofbeats, a kaleidoscopic twinkling of figures, the flashes of swords, clanging and thudding. Some of the Breguets who were pressed against the fish pond were putting up desperate resistance, herding together around a standard bearing an anchored cross. The Black Cloaks were slaughtering the scattered and exposed infantry. The view was obscured by a black cloak with a symbol of a silver sun. "Evgir! Nordling!" Aubrey yelled, and Chiquita, excited by the cry, gave a truly deer-like bound, saving Aubrey's life by carrying him out of range of the Nilfgaardian sword. Arrows and bolts suddenly howled over his head. Figures flickered before his eyes again. "Where am I? Where are my comrades? Where is the enemy?" "Evgir Morv! Nordling!" Thudding, clanking, neighing of horses, shouts. "Stand, you little shit! Not that way!" A woman's voice. A woman on a black stallion, in armour, with hair blown around, her face covered in spots of blood. Beside her, armoured horsemen. "Who are you?" The woman smeared the blood on her sword with a fist. "Cornet Aubrey, Constable Natalis' Flugel adjutant, with orders for Colonels Pangrat and Elves. You have no chance of getting to where Adieu is fighting. We'll ride to the dwarfs. I'm Julia Abatimarco. To horse, damn it! They're surrounding us, at the gallop." He didn't have time to protest. There was no point anyway. After some furious galloping, a mass of infantry emerged from the dust. A square, encased like a tortoise in a wall of pavises, like a pincushion bristling with spear blades. A great gold standard with crossed hammers fluttered over the square, and beside it rose up a pole with horsetails and human skulls. The square was being attacked by Nilfgaardians, who were darting forwards and jumping back like dogs, worrying a beggar swinging a cane. The Ardfen division, owing to the great suns on their cloaks, could not be mistaken for any other. "Fight, Free Company!" yelled the woman, whirling her sword around in a moulinet. "Let's earn our pay!" The horsemen, and with them Cornet Aubrey, charged the Nilfgaardians. The clash only lasted a few moments, but it was terrible. Then the wall of pavises opened before them. They found themselves inside the square, in a crush amongst dwarves in mail shirts, bassinets, and pointed chick-chack helmets, amongst the Redanian infantry, light Breguet horse, and armoured condottieri. Julia Abatimarco, Pretty Kitty, condottiero. Aubrey only now recognised her, dragged him in front of a pot-bellied dwarf in a chick-chack helmet decorated with a splendid plume, sitting awkwardly on an armoured Nilfgaardian horse in a lancer's saddle with large pommels, which he had clambered into to be able to see over the heads of the infantrymen. "Colonel Barclay Elves?" The dwarf nodded his plume-helmeted head, noticing with evident appreciation the blood with which the cornet and his mare were sprayed. Aubrey blushed involuntarily. It was the blood of the Nilfgaardians whom the condottieri had hacked down just beside him. He himself hadn't even managed to draw his sword. Cornet Aubrey, the son of Anselm Aubrey? His youngest. Ha! I know your father. What have you brought me from Natalis and Foltest, Cornet, my boy? You're threatened by a breach in the centre of the line. The constable orders the volunteer regiment to pull back the wing as soon as possible and retreat to Golden Pond and the River Chotla, in order to reinforce... His words were drowned out by roaring, clanging, and the squealing of horses. Aubrey suddenly realized how absurd the orders he had brought were. What little significance those orders had for Berkeley Elves, for Julia Abatimarco, for that dwarven square under a gold standard with hammers, fluttering over the surrounding black sea of Nilfgaard, attacking them from all sides. "I'm late," he whimpered. "I arrived too late." Pretty Kitty snorted. Berkeley Elves grinned. "No, little Cornet's son," he said. "It was Nilfgaard that came too soon." Congratulations to you, ladies, and to me, on a successful segmentectomy of the small and large bowel, splenectomy, and a liver suture. I draw your attention to the time it took to remove the consequences of what was done to our patient in a split second during the battle. I recommend that as material for philosophical reflections. Miss Shani will sew up the patient. But I've never done it before, Mr. Rusty. You have to start sometime. Red to red, yellow to yellow, white to white. So like that, and it's sure to be fine. What the hell? Berkeley Elves twisted his beard. What are you saying, little Cornet, Anselm Aubrey's youngest son? That we're just loafing around here? We didn't even fucking budge in the face of the enemy. We didn't budge an inch. It ain't our fault the men from Brugge didn't hold out. But the order, I don't give a shit about the order. If we don't fill the breaches, Pretty Kitty shouted over the commotion, the black cloaks will break the front. They'll break the front. Open the array, Berkeley. I'm going to strike. I'll get through. They'll slaughter you before you get to the fish pond. You'll perish senselessly. So what do you suggest? The dwarf swore, tore his helmet from his head, and hurled it to the ground. His eyes were savage, bloodshot, dreadful. Chiquita, frightened by the yells, danced beneath the cornet as far as the crush permitted. Summon Yap and Zigrin and Dennis Granma, pronto! It was apparent at first glance that the two dwarves had come from the heaviest fighting. They were both bespattered with blood. The steel spalder of one of them bore the mark of a cut so powerful it had bent the edges of the metal plating outwards. The head of the other dwarf was wrapped in a rag oozing blood. Everything in order, Zigrin? I wonder, panted the dwarf, why everyone's asking that. Berkeley Elves turned around, found the cornet's gaze, and stared hard at him. So, Anselm's youngest son, he rasped. The king and the constable have ordered us to go to them and support them. Well, keep your eyes wide open, little cornet. This'll be worth seeing. Sod it, roared Rusty, springing back from the table and brandishing his scalpel. Why, blast it, why does it have to be like this? No one answered him. Marty Södergren just spread her arms. Shani bowed her head, and Yola sniffed. The patient who had just died was looking upwards, and his eyes were unmoving and glazed. Strike! Kill! Confusion to the Horsans! Keep in line! Berkeley Elves roared. Keep an even step! Hold the line and keep close! Close! They won't believe, thought Cornet Aubrey. They'll never believe me when I tell them about it. This square is fighting in a total encirclement, surrounded on all sides by cavalry, being torn, hacked, pounded, and stabbed. And the square is marching. It's marching in line, serried, pavis by pavis. It's marching, trampling and stepping over corpses, pushing the elite Ardfean division in front of it. And it's marching. Fight! Even step, bellowed Berkeley Elves. Hold the line. The song, for fuck's sake, the song, our song. Forward, Mahakam! Several thousand dwarven throats yelled the famous Mahakam battle song. Ho, ho, ho. Just wait, don't be hasty. Things will very soon get tasty. This shambles will fall apart, shaken to its very heart. Ho, ho, ho. Fight, free company! Julia Abatimarco's high-pitched soprano cut into the throaty roar of the dwarves like the thin, keen edge of a misericord. The condottieri, breaking free of the line, counterstruck the cavalry, attacking the square. It was a truly suicidal stroke, as the entire momentum of the Nilfgaardian offensive turned onto the mercenaries, now deprived of the protection of the dwarven halberds, pikes, and pavises. The thudding, yelling, and squealing of horses made Cornet Aubrey cringe involuntarily in the saddle. Someone struck him in the back, and he felt himself drift with his mare, stuck in the crush, towards the greatest confusion and the most terrible slaughter. He tightly gripped his sword hilt, which suddenly seemed slippery and strangely unwieldy. A moment later, carried in front of the line of pavises, he was already hacking around himself like a madman and yelling like a madman. "One more time!" He heard the wild cry of Pretty Kitty. "One more shove! You'll do it, boys! Fight! Kill! For the ducat, as gold as the sun! To me, free company!" A helmetless Nilfgaardian rider with a silver sun on his cloak penetrated the line, stood up in his stirrups, and with a terrible blow of his battle-axe felled a dwarf along with his pavis and cleaved open the head of another. Aubrey turned in the saddle and hacked back-handed. A sizable fragment bearing hair flew from the head of the Nilfgaardian, who tumbled to the ground. At the same time, the cornet was also struck in the head and fell from the saddle. The crush meant he didn't end up on the ground immediately, but hung for several seconds, screaming shrilly, between the sky, the earth, and the sides of two horses. But although he had had the fright of his life, he didn't have time to experience pain. When he fell, his skull was almost immediately crushed by iron-shod hooves. 65 years later, when asked about that day, about Brenner Field, about the square marching towards Golden Pond over the bodies of friends and enemies, the old woman would smile, wrinkling up even more a face already as shriveled and dark as a prune. Impatient, or perhaps pretending to be impatient, she waved a trembling, bony hand, grotesquely contorted by arthritis. "There was no way," she mumbled, "that either of the sides could gain the advantage. We were in the middle, in the encirclement, and they were on the outside, and we were simply killing one another. They us, and we them. They us, we them." The old woman struggled to overcome a coughing fit. Those listeners who were closest saw on her cheek a tear, making its way with difficulty among the wrinkles and old scars. "They were just as brave as us," mumbled the old dear, who had once been Julia Abatimarco, Pretty Kitty of the Free Mercenary Company. "We were all just as brave. Us and them." The old woman fell silent for a long time. Her audience didn't urge her on, seeing her smile at her recollections, at her glory, at the faces of those who gloriously survived, looming in the fog of oblivion, of forgetting, in order later to be shabbily killed by vodka, drugs, and consumption. "We were all just as brave," finished Julia Abatimarco. "Neither of the sides had the strength to be braver. But we managed to be brave for a minute longer." "Marty, I'd be very grateful if you could give us a little more of your wonderful magic. Just a little bit more. Just a few ounces. The inside of this poor wretch's belly is one great goulash, seasoned additionally by loads of metal rings from a mail shirt. I can't do anything while he thrashes about like a fish being gutted. Shani, damn it, hold those retractors. Yola, are you asleep, damn it? Clamp! Clamp! Yola breathed out heavily, fighting to swallow the saliva filling her mouth. I'm going to faint soon, she thought. I can't bear it. I can't bear this any longer. This stench, this ghastly mixture of blood, puke, excrement, urine, the content of intestines, sweat, fear and death. I can't bear these endless screams any longer, this moaning, these bloodied, slimy hands clinging to me as though I really was their hope, their escape, their life. I can't bear the pointlessness of what we're doing. Because it is pointless. It's one great, enormous, pointless pit of pointlessness. I can't bear the effort and the fatigue. They keep bringing new ones, and new ones. I can't stand it. I'm going to vomit. I'm going to faint. I'll shame myself. Dressing, compress, bowel clamp. Not that one. Soft clamp. Mind what you're doing. Make another mistake and I'll smack you in that ginger head. Do you hear? I'll smack you in that ginger head. Great Melitala, help me. Help me, oh goddess. There. Better already. One more clamp, priestess. Clamp on the artery. Good. Good, Yola. Keep it up. Marty, mop his eyes and face. And mine, too. Where does that pain come from? Thought Constable Jan Natalis. What hurts so much? Aha! My clenched fists. Let's finish them off, yelled Gaze Van Loo, rubbing his hands. Let's finish them off, sir. The line's breaking along the formation. Let's strike without delay, and by the great sun they'll fall apart, they'll scatter. Menno Coehorn was nervously chewing a fingernail, realized they were watching, and quickly took his finger out of his mouth. Let's strike, repeated Gaze Van Loo calmly, not without emphasis. Now the Kea's ready. Now the Kea is to stand by, said Menno sharply. The Derlanians too, Mr. Foltiana. The commander of the Vriheth Brigade, Isengrim Foltiana, called the Iron Wolf, turned his awful face, disfigured by a scar running across his forehead, brow, bridge of the nose and cheek, towards the marshal. Strike. Menno pointed with his baton. At the junction of Temeria and Redania, over there. The elf saluted. His disfigured face didn't even twitch. His large eyes didn't change their expression. Allies, thought Menno. Confederates. We're fighting together against a common foe. But I don't understand them at all, those elves. They're somehow alien. Different. Interesting. Rusty tried to rub his face with his elbow, but his elbow was also covered in blood. Yola hurried to help him. Curious, repeated the surgeon, pointing at the patient. Stabbed by a pitchfork or some sort of two-pronged type of gizam. One of the prongs punctured the heart. There, please look. The chamber undoubtedly perforated, the aorta almost severed, and he was still breathing for a while. Here, on the table. Gored right in the heart. He survived all the way to the table. Do you wish to state, a cavalryman from the light volunteer horse asked gloomily, that he's expired? We bore him from the battle in vain. Nothing is in vain. Rusty didn't lower his eyes. And for the sake of the truth, then yes, he's dead, sadly. Exitus. Take him away. Oh, bloody hell. Take a look, girls. Marty Södergren, Shani and Yola bent over the body. Rusty pulled back the corpse's eyelid. Ever seen anything like that? All three of them shuddered. Yes, they all said at the same time. They glanced at each other as though slightly surprised. I have too, said Rusty. It's a Vitra, a mutant. That would explain why he lived so long. Was he your comrade at arms, men? Or did you bring him here by chance? He was our comrade, Mr. Medic, confirmed another volunteer gloomily, a beanpole with a bandaged head. From our squadron. A volunteer like us. Ah, he was a master with a sword. They called him Cohen. And he was a witcher. Aye, but he was a decent bloke otherwise. Ah, sighed Rusty, seeing 4 soldiers carrying another casualty on a blood-soaked cloak dripping with blood. He was very young, judging by how shrilly he was wailing. Ah, pity. I would have gladly taken that otherwise decent witcher for a post-mortem. I'm consumed with curiosity, and a paper could be written if one could just take a look inside him. But there's no time. Get the corpse off the table. Shani, water, Marty, disinfection. Yola, pass me. Hello, girl. Are you shedding tears again? What is it this time? Nothing, Mr. Rusty. Nothing. Everything's all right now. I feel, repeated Tris Merigold, as though I've been robbed. Nenneker didn't answer for a long time, and looked from the terrace towards the temple garden, where the priestesses and novices were busily engaged in their springtime work. You made a choice, she finally said. You chose your way, Tris, your own destiny, of your own free will. Now isn't the time for regrets. Nenneker. The sorceress lowered her eyes. I really can't say anything more than what I've said. Believe me and forgive me. Who am I to forgive you? And what would you get from my forgiving you? But I can see how you're glaring at me, Tris exploded. You and your priestesses. I can see you asking me questions with your eyes like, what are you doing here, witch? Why aren't you where Iola, Urinid, Katya and Mira are? And Yara? You're exaggerating, Tris. The sorceress looked into the distance at the forest, bluish beyond the temple wall, at the smoke of distant campfires. Nenneker said nothing. She was also far away in her thoughts, away where the fighting was raging and the blood was flowing. She thought about the girls she'd sent there. They talked me out of it all, Tris said. Nenneker said nothing. They talked me out of it all, Tris repeated. So wise, so sensible, so logical. How not to believe them when they explained that there are more and less important matters, that one ought to give up the less important ones without a second thought, sacrifice them for the important ones without a trace of regret, that there's no point saving people you know and love because they're individuals, and the fate of individuals is meaningless against the fate of the world, that there's no point fighting in the defense of virtue, honor, and ideals because they are empty notions, that the real battlefield for the fate of the world is somewhere else completely, that the fight will take place somewhere else. And I feel robbed. Robbed of the chance to commit acts of insanity. I can't insanely rush to help Ciri. I can't run and save Geralt and Yennefer like a madwoman. But that's not all. In the war being waged, in the war to which you sent your girls, in the war to which Yara fled, I'm even refused the chance to stand on the hill. To stand on the hill once more. This time with the awareness of a truly conscious and correct decision. Everybody has their own decision and their own hill, Tris, said the High Priestess softly. Everybody. You can't run away from yours either. There was a commotion in the entrance to the tent. Another casualty was being carried in, accompanied by several knights. One, in full-plate armour, was shouting, giving orders and urging the carriers on. Move, stretcher-bearers, quicker! Put him here! Here! Hey, you, medic! I'm busy. Rusty didn't even look up. Please put the wounded man on a stretcher. I'll see to him when I finish. You'll see to him immediately, stupid leech, for it is none other than the most honourable Count of Garamond. This hospital. Rusty raised his voice, angry, because the broken arrowhead stuck in the casualty's guts had once again slipped out of his forceps. This hospital has very little in common with democracy. They mainly bring in knights and upward, barons, counts, marquises, and various others of that ilk. Somehow, few care about wounded men of humbler birth. But there is some kind of equality here, nonetheless. That is on my table. Eh? You what? It doesn't matter. Rusty once again stuck a cannula and a pair of forceps into the wound. If this one here, from whose guts I'm removing bits of iron, is a peasant, a member of the minor gentry, old nobility, or aristocracy, He's lying on my table, and to me, as I hum to myself, a duke's worth a jester. Before God, we are all equally wise and equally foolish. You what? Your count will have to wait his turn. You confounded halfling. Help me, Shani, take the other forceps. Look out for that artery. Marty, just a little more magic if you would. We have serious hemorrhaging here. The knight took a step forward, teeth and armour grating. I'll have you hanged, he roared. I'll order you hanged, you unhuman. Silence, Babrock, the wounded count said with difficulty, biting his lips. Silence. Leave me and get back to the fighting. No, my lord, never. That was an order. A thudding and clanging of iron, the snorting of horses and wild cries reached their ears from behind the tent flap. The wounded in the field hospital moaned in various keys. Please look. Rusty raised his forceps, showing the splintered arrowhead he had finally extracted. A craftsman made this trinket, supporting a large family thanks to its manufacture, furthermore contributing to the growth of small craftwork, and thus also to general prosperity and universal happiness. And the way this ornament clings to human guts is surely protected by a patent. Long live progress. He casually threw the bloody blade into the bin and glanced at the casualty, who had fainted during the operation. Sew him up and take him away, he nodded. If he's lucky, he'll survive. Bring me the next in the queue, the one with the gashed head. That one, Marty Södergren said calmly, just gave up his place a moment ago. Rusty sucked in and exhaled, moved away from the table without unnecessary comments, and stood over the wounded count. Rusty's hands were bloody, and his apron splashed with blood like a butcher. Daniel Echeverry, the Count of Garamond, paled even more. Well, panted Rusty, it's your turn, Your Grace. Put him on the table. What do we have here? Nothing remains of that joint that could be saved. It's porridge. It's pulp. What do you whack each other with, Count, that you smash each other's bones like that? Well, it'll hurt a bit, Your Grace. It'll hurt a bit. But please, don't worry. It'll be just like it is in a battle. Tourniquet, knife. We're going to amputate, Your Grace. Daniel Echeverry, the Count of Garamond, who had put a brave face on it until then, howled like a wolf. Before he clenched his jaws from the pain, Shani quickly slipped a peg of lindenwood between his teeth. Your Royal Highness, Lord Constable. Talk, lad. The Volunteer Regiment and the Free Company are holding the defile near Golden Pond. The dwarves and condottieri are holding fast, although they're awfully bloodied. They say Adieu Pangrat's dead, Frontino's dead, Julia Abatamarco's dead. All of them, all dead. The Dorian Company, which came to relieve them, is slaughtered. Reserves, my Lord Constable, Foltest said quietly, but clearly. If you want to know my opinion, it's time to send in the reserves. Have Bronnibor throw his infantry at the Blackcloaks. Now, forthwith. Otherwise they'll dismember our lines, and that means the end. Jan Natalis didn't answer, now observing the next liaison officer rushing towards them from a distance on a horse, spraying flecks of foam. Get your breath back, lad. Get your breath back and speak concisely. They've breached the front. The elves of the Vreeheath Brigade. Graf de Ruyter informs your graces that... What does he inform us? Talk. That it's time to save your lives. Jan Natalis raised his eyes heavenwards. Blenkert, he said hollowly. May Blenkert come now, or may the night come. The ground around the tent trembled beneath hooves, and the tent walls, it seemed, billowed from the intensity of the cries and the neighing of horses. A soldier rushed into the tent, followed close behind by two orderlies. People flee! The soldier bellowed. Save yourselves! Nilfgaard is vanquishing our army! Destruction! Destruction! Defeat! Clamp! Rusty withdrew his face before the stream of blood, a potent and vivid fountain squirting from an artery. Clamp and a compress. Clamp, Shani. Marty, do something if you would about that bleeding. Someone howled like an animal right beside the tent, briefly, stopping abruptly. A horse squealed. Something hit the ground with a clank and a thud. A crossbow bolt punctured the canvas with a crack, hissed and flew out the other side, fortunately too high to threaten the wounded men lying on stretchers. "Nilfgaard!" the soldier shouted again, in a high, trembling voice. "Gentlemen medics, can't you hear what I'm saying? Nilfgaard has breached the royal line. They're coming and murdering. Flee!" Rusty took a needle from Marty Södergren and put in the first suture. The man being operated on hadn't moved for a long time, but his heart was beating, visibly. "I don't want to die," yelled one of the conscious wounded. The soldier cursed, dashed for the exit, suddenly yelled, crashed backwards, splashing blood, and tumbled onto the dirt floor. Yola, kneeling by the stretchers, leapt to her feet and stepped back. It suddenly went quiet. Not good, thought Rusty, seeing who was entering the tent. Elves, silver lightning bolts, the Vriheth Brigade, the notorious Vriheth Brigade. "A field hospital," the first of the elves stated. He was tall, with a pretty, oval, expressive face with large cornflower blue eyes. "Treating the wounded?" No one said anything. Rusty felt his hands begin to tremble. He quickly handed the needle to Marty. He saw Shani's forehead and the bridge of her nose pale. "So, what's this about?" said the elf, drawling his words menacingly. "Why do we wound our foes over there on the battlefield? Over there, in the fighting, we inflict wounds so men will die from them, and you treat them. I observe an absolute lack of logic here, and a conflict of interests." He stooped over and thrust his sword, almost without a swing, into the chest of the casualty on the stretcher nearest the entrance. Another elf pinned another wounded man with a half-pike. A third casualty, conscious, tried hard to stop a thrust with his left arm and the heavily bandaged stump of his right. Shani screamed, shrilly, piercingly, drowning out the heavy, inhuman groaning of the mutilated man being murdered. Yola, throwing herself onto a stretcher, covered the next casualty with her body. Her face blanched like the linen of a bandage, and her mouth began to twitch involuntarily. The elf squinted his eyes. "Va fort, Biana," he barked, "or I'll run you through along with this doina. Get out of here!" Rusty was beside Yola in 3 bounds, shielding her. "Get out of my tent, you murderer! Get back there to the battlefield. Your place is there, among the other murderers. Murder each other there, if that is your will, but get out of here." The elf looked down at the pot-bellied halfling, shaking with fear, the top of whose curly mop reached a little above his waist. "Blood Ferian," he hissed. "Totty to humans, get out of my way. Not a chance." The halfling's teeth were chattering, but his words were distinct. The second elf leapt forward and pushed the surgeon with the shaft of his half-pike. Rusty fell to his knees. The tall elf wrenched Yola away from the wounded man with a brutal tug and raised his sword, and froze, seeing on the rolled-up cloak under the injured man's head the silver flames of the Dythwyn division and the insignia of a colonel. "Yevine!" screamed an elf woman with dark hair woven into a plait, rushing into the tent. "Came below! Ed have gyrri the doina, and va, it's teeth!" The tall elf looked at the wounded colonel for a moment, then at the eyes of the surgeon, which were watering in terror. Then he turned on his heel and left. Once again the tramping of hooves, yelling and the clanging of iron could be heard from beyond the wall of the tent. "Have at the black cloaks! Murder!" 1,000 voices yelled. Someone howled like an animal, and the howling transformed into macabre wheezing. Rusty tried to stand up, but his legs failed him. His arms weren't much use either. Yola, trembling with powerful spasms of suppressed tears, curled up by the stretcher of the wounded Nilfgaardian in a fetal position. Shani was crying, not trying to hide her tears, but still holding the retractors. Marty was calmly putting in sutures, only her mouth moving in a kind of mute, silent monologue. Rusty, still unable to stand up, sat back down. He met the gaze of the orderly, huddled and squeezed into a corner of the tent. "Give me a swig of hooch," said Rusty with effort. "Just don't say you don't have any. I know you rascals. You always do." General Blenheim Blenkert stood up in his stirrups, stuck his neck out like a crane, and listened to the sounds of the battle. "Draw out the array," he ordered his commanders, "and we'll go at a trot at once behind that hill. From what the scouts say, it appears that we'll come out straight on the Blackcoats' right wing." "And we'll give them what for?" one of the lieutenants, a whippersnapper with a silky and very spare little moustache, shouted shrilly. Blenkert looked askance at him. "A detachment with a standard at the head," he ordered, drawing his sword. "And in the charge, cry, 'Redania!' Cry it at the top of your lungs. May Foltest and Natalis' boys know that the relief is coming." Graf Kobus de Ruyter had fought in various battles for 40 years since he was 16. Furthermore, he was an 8th-generation soldier. Without doubt, he had something in his genes. Something that meant that the roar and hubbub of battle, for everyone else simply a horrifying hullabaloo that drowned out everything else, was like a symphony, like a concert for a full orchestra to Kobus de Ruyter. De Ruyter had once heard other notes, chords and tones. "Hurrah, boys!" he roared, brandishing his baton. "Redania! Redania is coming! The Eagles! The Eagles!" From the north, from behind the hills, rolling towards the battle, came a mass of cavalry, over which an amaranth pennant and a great gonfalon with a silver Redanian eagle fluttered. "Relief!" yelled de Ruyter. "The relief's coming! Hurrah! Death to the Blackcloaks!" The 8th-generation soldier immediately noticed that the Nilfgaardian wing was wheeling around, trying to turn towards the charging relief with a disciplined, tight front. He knew he could not allow them to do that. "Follow me!" he roared, wresting the standard from the standard-bearer's hands. "Follow me! Traitogorians, follow me!" They struck suicidally, dreadfully, but effectively. The Nilfgaardians of the Venendal division fell into confusion, and then the Redanian companies drove into them. A great shout rose into the sky. Kobus de Ruyter didn't see or hear it. A stray bolt from a crossbow had struck him straight in the temple. The nobleman sagged in the saddle and fell from his horse, the standard covering him like a shroud. 8 generations of de Ruiters who had fallen fighting and were following the battle from the beyond nodded in acknowledgement. "It could be said, Captain, that the noodlings were saved by a miracle that day, or a coincidence that no one could have predicted. Admittedly, Restif de Montelon writes in his book that Marshal Couchon made a mistake in his assessment of the enemy's strength and plans, that he took too great a risk splitting up the center army group and setting off with a cavalry troop, that he took on a risky battle not having at least a threefold advantage, and that he neglected reconnaissance. He didn't uncover the Redanian army arriving with reinforcements. Cadet Puttkammer, Mr. de Montelon's work, which was of doubtful quality, is not included in this school's curriculum, and His Imperial Highness deigned to express himself extremely critically about the book. Thus, you will not quote it here, Cadet. Indeed, it astonishes me. Until now, your answers have been very good, positively excellent, and suddenly you begin to discourse about miracles and coincidences, while finally you take the liberty of criticizing the leadership abilities of Menno Couchon, one of the greatest leaders the Empire has produced. Cadet Puttkammer, and all the rest of you cadets, if you're seriously thinking about passing the final exam, you'll listen and remember. At the Battle of Brenna, no miracles or accidents were at work, but a conspiracy. Hostile saboteur forces, subversive elements, foul rabble-rousers, cosmopolites, political bankrupts, traitors and turncoats. A canker that was later burned out with white-hot iron. But before it came to that, those base traitors tangled up their own nation in spiderwebs and wove a snare of scheming. It was they who inveigled and betrayed Marshal Cuchon, then deceived him and misled him. It was they, scoundrels without faith or honor. Whoresons, repeated Menno Cuchon, without taking the telescope from his eye. Common whoresons. But I'll find you. Just wait. I'll teach you what reconnaissance means. De Wingelt. You will personally find the officer who was on the patrol beyond the hills to the north. Have all of them, the entire patrol, hanged. Yes, sir. Ute de Wingelt, the marshal's aide-de-camp, clicked his heels together. He could not know that right then, Lamar Flout, the officer from the patrol, was dying, trampled by horses of the secret reserves of the Nordlings who were attacking the flanks, the reserves he hadn't uncovered. Neither could de Wingelt know that he only had 2 hours of life left. How many of them are there, Mr. Trahe? Cuchon didn't take the telescope from his eye, in your opinion. At least 10,000, replied the commander of the 7th Derlanian dryly. Mainly Redania, but I also see the chevron of Aedirn. The unicorn is also there, so we also have Caedwen, with a detachment of at least a company. The company was galloping. Sand and grit flew from beneath hooves. Forward, you duns! roared Centurion Halfpot, drunk as usual. Attack! Kill! Caedwen! Caedwen! Damn it, but I'm dying for a piss, thought Zivik. I should have gone before the battle. Now there might not be a chance. Forward, you duns! Always the duns. Wherever things are going wrong, the duns. Who did they send as an expeditionary force to Temeria? The duns. Always the Dun banner. I need a piss. They arrived. Zivik yelled, turned around in the saddle, and slashed backhand, destroying the spalder and shoulder of a horseman in a black cloak with an 8-pointed silver star. The Duns! Caedwen! Fight! Kill! The Dun banner standard struck Nilfgaard with a thud, a clatter and a clank, amidst the roars of soldiers and the squeals of horses. De Melis Stoke and Brabant will cope with that relief, said Ilan Trahe, the commander of the 7th Derlanian Brigade, calmly. The forces are balanced. Nothing has gone wrong yet. Tyrconnell's division is counterbalancing the left wing. Manya and Verendal are managing on the right. And we can tip the scales by striking the line going in after the Elves. Menno Cuchon understood at once. By striking at the rear lines, sowing panic. That's it. That's what we shall do, by the great sun. To your companies, gentlemen. Nazakeia and the 7th, your time has come. Long live the Emperor! Yelled Gaze von Loo. Lord de Wingelt. The Marshal turned around. Please muster the adjutants and the guard troop. Enough inactivity. We are going to charge with the 7th Derlanian. Ude de Wingelt paled slightly, but immediately regained control. Long live the Emperor! He cried, and there was almost no tremor in his voice. Rusty cut, and the wounded man wailed and scratched the table. Yola, bravely fighting giddiness, was taking care of the tourniquets and clamps. Shani's raised voice could be heard from the entrance to the tent. Where? Are you insane? The living are waiting to be saved here, and you're marching in with corpses? But this is Baron Anselm Aubrey himself, Madam Merrick, the company commander. It was the company commander, now it's our corpse. You only managed to bring him in one piece because his armour is watertight. Take him away. This is a field hospital, not a mortuary. But, Madam Medic, don't block the entrance. Look there. They're carrying one that's still breathing. Or at least he looks like he's still breathing, because it might just be wind. Rusty snorted, but immediately afterwards raised an eyebrow. Shani, come here at once. Remember your chit, he said through clenched teeth, bending over the mutilated leg, that a surgeon can only take the liberty of cynicism after 10 years of experience. Will you remember that? Yes, Mr. Rusty. Take the respiratory and strip off the periosteum. Blast. It will be worth anaesthetizing him a little more. Where's Marty? She's puking outside the tent, said Shani, without a trace of cynicism. Puking her guts out. Sorcerers. Rusty took hold of a saw. Instead of thinking up numerous awful and powerful spells, they would be better thinking up one. One that would enable them to cast minor spells, for example, anesthetizing ones, without difficulty and without puking. The saw grated and crunched on bone. The wounded man moaned. "Tighten the tourniquet, Yola." The bone finally gave way. Rusty tidied it up with a small chisel and wiped his forehead. "Blood vessels and nerves," he said mechanically and needlessly, because before he had finished the sentence, the girls were already putting in the sutures. He removed the severed leg from the table and threw it down onto a pile of other severed limbs. The wounded man hadn't roared or moaned for some time. "Fainted or dead?" "Fainted, Mr. Rusty." "Good. Sew up the stump, Shiny. Bring on the next one. Yola, go and find out if Marty has puked everything up." "I wonder," said Yola very quietly, without raising her head, "how many years of experience you have, Mr. Rusty? 100? After a quarter of an hour of strenuous marching and choking on dust, the yells of the Centurions and Decurions ceased, and the Vicemian regiments spread out in a line. Yara, gasping and gulping in air through his mouth like a fish, saw Voivode Bronibor strutting before the front on his beautiful armoured steed. The Voivode himself was also in full plate armour. His armour was enamelled in blue stripes, making Bronibor look like a great steel-plated mackerel. "How are you, you dolts?" The rows of pikemen answered with a rumbling growl like distant thunder. "You're issuing farting sounds," the Voivode noted, reining his armoured horse around and directing him to walk before the front. "That means you're feeling good. When you're feeling bad, you don't fart in hushed tones, but you wail and howl like the damned. It's clear from your expressions that you're spoiling for a fight, that you're dreaming of battle, that you can't wait to get your hands on the Nilfgaardians. Right, you Vicemian brigands? Then I have good news for you. Your dream will come true in a short while. In a very short while." The pikeman muttered again. Bronibor, after riding to the end of the line, turned around and spoke on, rapping his mace against the ornamental pommel of his saddle. "You stuffed yourselves with dust, infantry, marching behind the armoured troops. Up until now, instead of glory and spoils, you've been sniffing horses' farts. And even today, when a great battle is upon us, you almost didn't make it to the field. But you managed it, so I congratulate you with all my heart. Here, outside this village, whose name I've forgotten, you will finally show how much worth you have as an army. That cloud you see on the battlefield is the Nilfgaardian horse, which means to crush our army with a flanking strike, shove us and drown us in the bogs of this little river, whose name I have also forgotten. The honour of defending the breach that has arisen in our ranks has fallen to you, celebrated Vicemian pikemen, by the grace of King Foltest and Constable Natalis. You will close that breach, so to speak, with your breasts. You will stop the Nilfgaardian charge. You're rejoicing, comrades, what? You're bursting with pride, eh?" Yara, squeezing his pike-staff, looked around. There was nothing to indicate that the soldiers were rejoicing at the prospect of the imminent battle, and if they were bursting with pride by virtue of the honour of closing the breach, they were skillfully disguising it. Melfi, standing on the boy's right, was mumbling a prayer under his breath. On his left, Doislax, a hardened professional soldier, sniffed, swore, and coughed nervously. Bronibor reined his horse around and sat up straight in the saddle. "I can't hear you," he roared. "I asked if you're bursting with fucking pride." This time the pikemen, seeing no alternative, roared with one great voice that they were. Yara also roared. If everyone was, he might as well too. "Good." The Voivode reined back his horse before the front. "And now, stand in an orderly array. Centurions, what are you waiting for fuck's sake? Form a square. The first rank kneels, the second stands. Ground your pikes. Not that end, ass. Yes, I'm talking to you, you horrible little man. Higher. Hold your pikestaff higher, you wretches. Close ranks, close up. Close ranks, shoulder to shoulder. Well, now you look impressive. Almost like an army." Yara found himself in the second rank. He pushed the butt of his pike into the ground and gripped the pikestaff in his hands, sweaty from fear. Melfi was muttering indistinctly. repeating various words over and over, mainly concerning the private lives of the Nilfgaardians, dogs, bitches, kings, constables, voivodes, and all their mothers. The cloud in the battlefield grew. "Don't fart there! Don't chatter your teeth!" roared Bronnibor. "Thoughts of frightening the Nilfgaardian horses with those noises are misguided. Let no man deceive himself. What is headed for you are the Nausicaa and the 7th Delanian Brigades. Splendid, valiant, superbly trained soldiers. They can't be scared. They can't be defeated. They have to be killed. Hold those pikes higher." From a distance, the still soft but growing thud of hooves could now be heard. The ground began to shudder. Blades began to glint like sparks in the cloud of dust. "It's your good fucking fortune, Vicimians," the voivode roared once more, "that the standard infantry pike of the new modernised model is 21 feet long, and a Nilfgaardian sword is 3.5 feet long. Can you reckon? Know that they can too. But they are counting on your not holding out, that your true nature will emerge, that it will be confirmed and revealed that you are shitheads, cowards, and mangy sheepshaggers. The Black Cloaks are counting on you to throw down your poles and start running, and they will pursue you across the battlefield and hack you on the backs, heads, and necks. Hack you comfortably and with no difficulty. Well, remember, you little shits, that although fear lends the heels extraordinary speed, you won't outrun cavalrymen. Whoever wants to live, whoever wants glory and spoils, must stand. Stand firm. Stand like a wall, and close ranks." Yara looked back. The crossbowmen standing behind the line of pikemen were already winding their cranks, and the interior of the square was bristling with the points of guisarmes, lanceurs, halberds, glaives, partisans, scythes, and pitchforks. The ground trembled more and more distinctly and powerfully, and it was already possible to discern the shapes of horsemen in the black wall of cavalry hurtling towards them. "Mama, dear mother," repeated Melfi through trembling lips. "Mama, dear mother." "Fucker," mumbled Doislax. The hoofbeats intensified. Yara wanted to lick his lips, but he couldn't. His tongue had gone stiff. His tongue stopped behaving normally. It had stiffened strangely and was as dry as a bone. The hoofbeats intensified. "Close ranks!" roared Bronnibor, drawing his sword. "Feel your comrade's shoulder. Remember, none of you is fighting alone, and the only remedy for the fear you're feeling is the pike in your fist. Prepare to fight. Pikes aimed at the horses' chests. What are we going to do, Vicimian brigands? I'm asking." "Stand firm!" roared the pikemen with one voice. "Stand like a wall! Close ranks!" Yara also roared. If everyone was, he might as well too. Sand, grit, and turf sprayed from beneath the hooves of the advancing wedge of cavalry. The charging horsemen yelled like demons, brandishing their weapons. Yara leaned onto his pike, buried his head in his shoulders, and shut his eyes. Yara shooed away a wasp circling above his inkwell with a violent movement of his stump, without interrupting his writing. Marshal Coulhorn came to nothing. His flanking troop was stopped by the heroic Vicimian infantry under Voivode Bronnibor, paying in blood for his heroism. And at the moment the Vicimians resisted, Nilfgaard fell into confusion on the left wing. Some of them began to take flight, others to pull together and defend themselves in groups, surrounded on all sides. Soon after, the same thing happened on the right wing, where the doggedness of the dwarves and condottieri finally overcame Nilfgaard's assault. A single great cry of triumph went up along the entire front, and a new spirit entered the royal knights, and the spirit fell in the Nilfgaardians. Their hands weakened, and our men began to shell them like peas, so loudly it echoed. And Field Marshal Menno Coulhorn understood that the battle was lost, saw the brigades perishing and falling into confusion around him. And then his officers and knights ran to him, giving him a fresh horse, calling for him to flee and save his own life. But a fearless heart beat in the breast of the Nilfgaardian field marshal. "That will not do," he called, pushing away the reins held out towards him. "It will not do for me to flee like a coward from the field on which so many good men under my command have fallen for the Emperor." And the doughty Menukuhorn added, "Besides, now there's nowhere to fuck off to," Menukuhorn added calmly and soberly, looking around the battlefield. "They're surrounding us on all sides." "Give me your cloak and helmet, sir." Captain Sievers wiped blood and sweat from his face. "Take mine, sir. Dismount your steed and take mine. Don't protest. You must live, sir. You're indispensable to the Empire, irreplaceable. We Derlanians will strike the Nordlings. We'll draw them to us. You, meanwhile, try to break through down there, below the fish pond." "You won't get out of that alive," muttered Kuhorn, taking the reins being offered to him. "It's an honor." Sievers straightened up in the saddle. "I'm a soldier of the 7th Derlinians. To me! Have faith! To me!" "Good luck," mumbled Kuhorn, throwing over his back a Derlanian cloak with a black scorpion on the shoulder. "Sievers." "Yes, sir, Marshal, sir." "Nothing. Good luck, lad." "And may luck be on your side, sir. To horse. Have faith." Kuhorn watched them ride off for a long while, until the moment Siva's small group rode with a bang, a yell, and a thud into the condottieri, into a troop considerably outnumbering them, to whose aid, indeed, other troops hurried at once. The Derlanians' black cloaks vanished among the greyness of the condottieri. All was lost in the dust. The nervous coughing of de Wingalt and the adjutants brought Kuhorn to his senses. The marshal adjusted the stirrup leathers and flaps. He brought the restless steed under control. "To horse," he commanded. At first, things went well for them. In the mouth of the valley leading to the rivulet, a dwindling troop of survivors of the Nausicaa Brigade was doggedly defending itself, forced into a circle bristling with blades, onto which the Nordlings had concentrated all their momentum and force, making a breach in the ring. Naturally, they didn't get away totally unscathed. They had to hack their way through a row of light volunteer horse, probably Brigaean, judging by their insignia. The skirmish was very short, but furiously fierce. Kuhorn had already lost and discarded all remains and appearances of lofty heroism, and now just wanted to survive. Not even looking back at his escort, trading vicious blows with the Brigaeans, he rushed towards the stream with his adjutants, pressing himself to and hugging the horse's neck. The way was clear. Beyond the little river, beyond the crooked willows, a barren plain spread out, on which no enemy troops could be seen. Uda de Wingalt, galloping beside Kuhorn, also saw it and yelled triumphantly. Prematurely. A meadow covered in bright green knotgrass separated them from the sluggish, murky little river. When they charged into it at full gallop, the horses suddenly plunged up to their bellies in the bog. The marshal flew over his steed's head and fell headfirst into the bog. All around, horses were neighing and kicking, and men covered in mud and green duckweed were yelling. Menno suddenly heard another sound amidst this pandemonium, a sound that meant death. The hiss of fletchings. He dashed for the current of the small river, wading up to his hips in the thick marsh. An adjutant, forcing his way through beside him, suddenly tumbled face first into the mud, and the marshal saw a bolt stuck into his back up to the fletchings. At that same moment, he felt a terrible blow to the head. He staggered, but didn't fall, stuck in the mud and swamp. He wanted to scream, but only managed to splutter. "I'm alive," he thought, trying to wriggle out of the clutch of the sticky slime. A horse struggling out of the marsh had kicked him in the helmet, and the deeply dented metal had shattered his cheek, knocked out some teeth, and cut his tongue. "I'm bleeding. I'm swallowing blood. But I'm alive." Once again the slap of bowstrings, the hiss of fletchings, the thud and crack of arrowheads penetrating armor, yells, the neighing of horses, squelching and blood splashing. The marshal looked back and saw bowmen on the bank. Small, stocky, pot-bellied shapes in mail shirts, bassinets, and pointed chick-chacks. Dwarves, he thought. The slap of bowstrings, the whistle of bolts, the squeal of horses threshing around, the yelling of men choking on water and mud. Uda de Vingald, turning towards the marksman, cried in a high, squeaky voice that he was surrendering, asking for mercy and compassion, promised a ransom, and begged for his life. Aware that no one understood his words, he raised his sword, held by the blade above his head. He held the weapon out towards the dwarves in the international, outright cosmopolitan gesture of surrender. He wasn't understood, or was misunderstood, for 2 bolts slammed into his chest with such force that the impact hurled him up out of the bog. Kuhorn tore the dented helmet from his head. He knew the common speech of the Nordlings quite well.
"I'll battle Kuhorn,"
he mumbled, spitting blood.
"Muffle Kuhorn. I surrender. Mercy, mercy."
"What's he saying, Zoltan?" one of the crossbowmen asked in surprise. "Bugger him and his chattering. Do you see the embroidery on his cloak, Munro? A silver scorpion. Ah! Wallop the whoreson, boys, for Caleb Stratton. For Caleb Stratton!" Bowstrings clanged. 1 bolt hit Kuhorn straight in the chest, the second in the hip, and the third in the collarbone. The Nilfgaardian field marshal fell over backwards in the watery mush, the knotgrass and swamp yielding under his weight. Who the bloody hell could Caleb Stratton be? He managed to think. I've never heard of any Caleb. The murky, viscous, muddied and bloodied water of the river Chotla closed over his head and gushed into his lungs. She went outside the tent to get some fresh air, and then she saw him sitting beside the blacksmith's bench. "Yara!" He raised his eyes towards her. There was emptiness in those eyes. "Yola?" he asked, moving his swollen lips with difficulty. "How come you're—" "What a question!" She interrupted him at once. "You'd better tell me how you've ended up here." "We've brought our commander, Voivode Bronibor. He's wounded. You're also wounded. Show me that hand. Oh, goddess. But you'll bleed to death, lad." Yara looked at her, and Yola suddenly began to doubt whether he could see her. "It's a battle," said the boy, teeth chattering slightly. "You must stand like a wall. Steady in the line. The lightly wounded are to carry the heavily wounded to the field hospital. It's an order. Show me your hand." Yara howled briefly, his clenching teeth snapping in a wild staccato. Yola frowned. "Oh my, it looks dreadful. Oh dear, Yara. Yara, you'll see. Mother Neneka will be angry. Come with me." She watched him blanch when he saw it, when he smelled the stench hanging beneath the roof of the tent. He staggered. She held him up. She saw him looking at the bloodied table, at the man lying there, at the surgeon, a small halfling who suddenly leapt up, stamped his feet, cursed foully, and threw a scalpel on the ground. "Damn it! Fuck it! Why is it like this? Why does it have to be like this?" No one replied to the question. "Who was it?" "Voivode Bronibor," explained Yara in a feeble voice, looking straight ahead with his empty gaze. "Our commander. We stood firm in the line. It was an order, like a wall. And they killed Melfi." "Mr. Rusty," Yola asked, "this boy's a friend of mine. He's wounded." "He's on his feet," the surgeon assessed coldly. "And here there's a dying man waiting for a trepanation. There's no room here for any sentimental connections." At that moment, Yara, with excellent timing, fainted dramatically and fell down on the dirt floor. The halfling snorted. "Oh, very well. On the table with him," he commanded. "Oh-ho, a nicely smashed arm. I wonder what's holding it on. His sleeve, I think. Tourniquet, Yola. Tightly. And don't you dare cry. Shani, give me a saw." The saw dug into the bone above the crushed elbow joint with a hideous crunching. Yara came to and bellowed, horribly but briefly, for when the bone gave way, he immediately fainted again. And thus the might of Nilfgaard was reduced to dust on the Brenna battlefields, and an end was put to the march of the Empire northwards. Either by being killed or taken captive, the Empire lost 40,000 men at the Battle of Brenna. The flower of the knighthood and the elite cavalry fell. Leaders of the stature of Menno Coehorn, Brabant, de Melis Stoke, Van Loo, Tyrconnell, Egerbracht, and others whose names have not survived in our archives, fell, were taken prisoner, or disappeared without trace. Thus did Brenna become the beginning of the end. But it behoves me to write that that battle was but a small stone in the building, and superficial would have been its importance had the fruits of the victory not been wisely taken advantage of. It behoves us to recall that instead of resting on his laurels and bursting with pride and awaiting honours and homage, Jan Natalis headed south almost without stopping. The cavalry troop under Adam Pangrat and Julia Abatimarco destroyed 2 divisions of the Third Army that had brought belated relief to Menno Coehorn, routing them such that nec nuncius cladis. At news of this, the rest of the Centre Army group took miserable flight and fled in haste to the far side of the Uruga. And since Foltest and Natalis were on their heels, the Imperial forces lost entire convoys and all their siege engines, with which, in their hubris, they had meant to capture Vicima, Gorzvelen, and Novigrad. And like an avalanche rolling down from the mountains, becoming covered in more and more snow and becoming greater, so also Brenna caused more and more severe results for Nilfgaard. Hard times came for the Veden army under Duke de Vet, whom the corsairs from Skellige and King Ithane of Sedaris sorely vexed in a guerrilla war. When, meanwhile, de Vet learned about Brenna, when news reached him that King Foltest and Jan Natalis were marching briskly to him, he immediately ordered the trumpeting of the retreat and fled to Sintra, strewing the escape route with corpses, because at the news of the Nilfgaardian defeats, an insurrection in Verden flared up anew. Only in the undefeated strongholds of Nastrog, Rosrog, and Bolrog did powerful garrisons remain, for which reason only after the peace of Sintra did they leave honourably and with their standards intact. Whereas in Aedion, the tidings about Brenna led to the feuding kings Demavend and Henselt shaking each other's right hands and taking arms against Nilfgaard together. The East Army Group, which, under the command of Duke Ardal Evdai, marched towards the Pontar Valley, did not manage to challenge the 2 allied kings. Strengthened by reinforcements from Redania and Queen Maeve's guerrillas, who had cruelly plundered Nilfgaard, Demavend and Henselt drove Ardal Abdai all the way to Aldersburg. Duke Ardal wanted to give battle, but by a strange twist of fate, he suddenly fell ill, having eaten something. He came down with the colic and diarrhea miserere, and thus, in 2 days, he died in great pain. And Demavend and Henselt, without delay, attacked the Nilfgaardians, also there at Aldersburg, evidently for the sake of historical justice, and they routed them in a decisive battle, though Nilfgaard still had a significant numerical advantage. Thus do spirit and artistry usually triumph over dull and brutal force. It behooves me to write about one more thing. What exactly happened to Menno Coehorn himself at the Battle of Brenna, no one knows. Some say he fell and his body, unrecognized, was buried in a common grave. Others say he escaped with his life, but fearing imperial wrath did not return to Nilfgaard, but hid in Brooklon among the Dryads, and there became a hermit, letting his beard grow down to the ground, and there, shortly after, expired amidst his worries. A story circulates among simple folk that the marshal returned at night to the Brenner battlefield and walked among the burial mounds, wailing, "Give me back my legions," until finally he hanged himself on an aspen spike on the hill called Gibbet Hill because of that. And at night one can happen upon the ghost of the celebrated marshal among other apparitions that commonly haunt the battlefield. "Grandfather Yara! Grandfather Yara!" Yara raised his head from his papers and adjusted his spectacles, which were slipping down his sweaty nose. "Grandfather Yara!" his youngest granddaughter shouted in the upper register. She was a determined and bright 6-year-old who, thank the gods, had taken more after her mother, Yara's daughter, than his lethargic son-in-law. "Grandfather Yara, Grandmother Lucienne told me to tell you that that's enough for today of that layabout scribbling and that tea's on the table." Yara meticulously assembled the written sheets and corked the inkwell. Pain throbbed in the stump of his arm. "The weather's changing," he thought. "There'll be rain. Grandfather Yara! I'm coming, Ciri. I'm coming." It was already well after midnight before they had dealt with the last casualties. They carried out the final operations by artificial light, first from an ordinary lamp and later using magic. Marty Södergren recovered after the crisis she had undergone, and although as pale as death, stiff and as unnatural in her movements as a golem, used her magic competently and effectively. The night was black when they exited the tent, and all 4 of them sat down leaning against the canvas. The plain was full of fires, various fires, the stationary fires of camps, and the moving flames of torches. The night resounded with distant song, chanting, shouts, and cheers. The night around them was also alive with the intermittent cries and groans of the wounded, the pleading and sighs of the dying. They didn't hear it. They had become accustomed to the sounds of suffering and dying, and those sounds were ordinary, natural to them, as integrated into the night as the croaking of frogs in the marshes by the river Chotla, or the singing of cicadas in the acacia trees by Golden Pond. Marty Södergren sat in lyrical silence, resting on the halfling's shoulder. Yola and Shani, indifferent, cuddling one another, snorted from time to time with completely nonsensical laughter. Before they sat down against the tent, they had each drunk a cup of vodka, and Marty had treated all of them with her last spell, a cheering charm, typically used when extracting teeth. Rusty felt cheated by this treatment. The drink, combined with the magic, instead of relaxing him, had stupefied him. Instead of reducing his exhaustion, had increased it. Instead of giving oblivion, brought back memories. "It looks," he thought, "as though the alcohol and magic have only acted as they were meant to on Yola and Shani." He turned around, and in the moonlight saw sparkling, silvery tracks of tears on the girls' faces. "I wonder," he said, licking his numb, insensitive lips, "who won this battle? Does anybody know?" Marty turned her face towards him, but remained silent. The cicadas were singing among the acacias, willows, and alders by Golden Pond, and the frogs croaked. The wounded moaned, begged, and sighed, and died. Shani and Yola giggled through their tears. Marty Södergren died 2 weeks after the battle. She began meeting an officer of the Free Company of Condottieri. She treated the affair light-heartedly, unlike the officer. When Marty, who liked change, began fraternizing with a Temerian cavalry captain, the condottiero, mad with jealousy, stabbed her with a knife. He was hanged for it, but it was impossible to save the healer. Rusty and Yola died a year after the battle, in Maribor, during the largest outbreak yet of an epidemic of viral hemorrhagic fever, a disease also called the Red Death, or, from the name of the ship it was brought on, Katrina's plague. All the physicians and most of the priests fled from Maribor then. Rusty and Yola remained, naturally. They treated the sick because they were doctors. The fact that there was no cure for the Red Death was unimportant to them. They both became infected. He died in her arms in the powerful, confidence-inspiring embrace of her large, ugly, peasant hands. She died 4 days later, alone. Shani died 72 years after the battle, as the celebrated and universally respected retired dean of the Department of Medicine at the University of Oxenfurt. Generations of future surgeons used to repeat her famous joke. So red to red, yellow to yellow, white to white. It's sure to be fine. Almost no one noticed how, after delivering that witty anecdote, the dean always wiped away a furtive tear. Almost no one. The frogs croaked, and the cicadas sang among the willows by Golden Pond. Shani and Yola giggled through their tears. I wonder, repeated Milo Vanderbeck, halfling, field surgeon, known as Rusty. I wonder who won. Rusty, Marty Södergren said lyrically. Believe me, in your shoes, it's the last thing I'd be worrying about. Some of the flames were tall and strong, burning brightly and vividly, while others were tiny, flickering and quavering, and their light diminished and died. At the very end was but one tiny flame, so weak it barely flickered and glimmered, now struggling to flare up, now almost going out entirely. Whose is the dying flame? Asked the Witcher. Yours, Death replied. Florence Delanoy, Fairy Tales and Stories.